My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 42, a career officer in the United States military. And on the day this story happened, I wasn't wearing my uniform. That wasn't by choice. It was a very clear request from my family. Please, Natalie, not the uniform. It's a formal event. We don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. It was my cousin Jake's engagement party. He's always been the golden narrative in the family. Ivy League finance guy. Charming in that overly rehearsed way, the type who's never had to explain his job at the dinner table because people just assumed it involved money and power. I stood near the bar, holding a glass of water I hadn't touched, watching him work the room with his fiancée, Lexi, whose smile never quite reached the expensive calculation in her eyes. Earlier that week, my aunt had called with a list of gentle suggestions, but one stood out like a blaring emergency beacon. No uniform, sweetheart. Lexi's father is in defense contracting. It might come across as aggressive. I knew what she meant. She meant don't show up looking like you outrank the men in their custom suits. Don't be the kind of woman who makes their perceived hierarchy nervous. So I said, fine. I wore a soft blue dress, sensible heels, and I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself it wasn't the time to make a statement. But the moment I stepped into that reception, I knew exactly where I stood. Smiles were polite, questions were shallow trenches, and more than one person asked me if I still did that Navy logistics thing. And then Lexi approached. She swirled her champagne, leaned in with that fake, glittering curiosity, and asked if I ever got bored doing office work for ships. Like decorating them or something. She laughed, not unkindly, just casually annihilating. I smiled. I had to. That's what they expected. But inside, something steel-hard shifted. I wasn't just the cousin with the strange career anymore. I was someone being actively asked to dim my own light, to pretend, to disappear a little bit so others could shine brighter and feel safer. And I realized then, as I watched my reflection blur in a polished silver tray, that maybe it was time for them to see exactly who I was. Not Navy Natalie, not logistics girl, Commander Brooks. And I wasn't here to play small. There's this mug I still keep tucked away in the back of my kitchen cabinet. White ceramic, pink letters, thick bubble font, Girl Boss. They gave it to me for Christmas a few years ago. Everyone laughed when I opened it. My aunt said it was perfect for Natalie's little desk job. I smiled, said thank you, and set it down gently, like a cheap gift I always did. That same year, Jake got a Rolex. Not for graduating or getting married, just for closing some accounts in his second year at a mid-tier firm. They passed it around like it was a holy relic. My uncle held it up to the light. My grandmother asked if he was allowed to wear it at work, as if it would intimidate clients. No one asked what I had been doing. No one mentioned that just days before, I had coordinated a multinational naval operation from a command center halfway across the globe. It's always been like that. I could be in uniform, straight from a deployment that made the news, and they'd still ask if I was taking time off to rethink my career path. Meanwhile, Jake could land a summer internship and get a family brunch thrown in his honor. One time, at Thanksgiving, I brought up a strategy we were developing for increased maritime readiness. My aunt smiled, touched my arm, and said, "You always were good with boats." Like I just told her. I collected toy models in my garage. Over the years, I learned to read the room. To cut my stories short when eyes glazed over with disinterest. To dodge questions I knew weren't real questions. I became the polite, quiet cousin. The one who travels a lot for work but no one really knew where or why. I started dressing down at family events. I stopped correcting them when they got my rank wrong. And every time I chose silence, I told myself it was easier than the alternative. But it came with a cost. I began to shrink around them, to fold in the parts of myself that didn't fit their idea of who I should be. Jake was their image of success. Polished, predictable, financially fluent. I was an outlier with medals they didn't understand, an authority they couldn't place. It's strange how invisibility isn't always about being ignored. Sometimes it's being seen, but never truly recognized. They didn't know about the classified briefings, the nights without sleep, the weight of decisions that carry real-world consequences. They didn't want to know, because knowing would mean recognizing that power doesn't always look like money, or cufflinks, or corner offices. Sometimes, it looks like a woman who learned how to stand straight even when her family tried to bend her. So I smiled. I sipped from the girl boss mug. I let them celebrate Jake, and I kept showing up to those dinners, those holidays, those birthdays. But deep down, I think a part of me was always waiting for the day they'd finally see past the polite smiles and realize who they were really talking to. The call came on a Tuesday night. I had just finished a 16-hour shift reviewing readiness reports for a Pacific deployment. My eyes burned. My coffee was cold. And all I wanted was a quiet evening. When I saw my mother's name on the screen, I almost didn't answer. Calls from home usually came with expectations, not conversations. Her voice was sweet at first, falsely polite. The kind that meant bad news was wrapped in something pleasant. "Hi, honey. How are you? You must be so busy. We just wanted to talk about Jake's engagement party." I waited. There was always a but coming. "Natalie, sweetheart, this is a big event. Lexi's father will be there. He's very important, you know, a defense executive. Everyone will be trying to make a good impression." I could already hear where this was going, and I braced myself. Then came the part that stung. "We think it might be better if you didn't wear your uniform this time. You know, just something more approachable. More approachable." The words hung in the air like acrid smoke. My hand tightened around the phone. Approachable. As in less intimidating. As in less like me. My mother kept talking, explaining how proud they were of me. How they didn't want people to feel uncomfortable. How this night was about Jake's future. Not mine. "It wasn't about me," she repeated. "It never was." I wanted to hang up, but she passed the phone to my aunt, the family's unofficial PR manager. "Natalie, dear," she said in her clipped, efficient tone, "it's not that we don't respect what you do. We just think, with Lexi's father there, it's better if you know, keep things light. Maybe just say you work in logistics. It sounds more relatable." Logistics. That word again. Their favorite euphemism for something we can safely dismiss. I could almost hear the smile on her face, the relief of having solved the problem of me. When the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time. The room was dark, except for the soft glow of my monitor. I told myself I shouldn't take it personally. That this was just family trying to manage optics. But the truth was uglier. They weren't embarrassed by my job. They were embarrassed by my authority. They didn't want their friends, their polished guests, to see a woman in command. They wanted the version of me that fit neatly into their narrative, the one who didn't disrupt their hierarchy. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from Jake. "Hey Nat, Mom told me she talked to you. Just don't make it weird, okay? It's a big night. Don't make it weird." I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. I read it again and again, like it might mean something different the 10th time. But it didn't. It meant exactly what it said. Sit down. Smile. Be small. That was the moment something in me shifted from weariness to steel. The exhaustion that had lived under my skin for years finally hardened into something cold and steady. I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. They had crossed a line, not just by asking me to hide who I was, but by asking me to compromise the integrity of my position. A defense contractor was under my command's oversight. Asking me to play along wasn't just insulting, it was inappropriate, potentially dangerous. I set the phone down and looked out the window. The city lights flickered like constellations reflected in glass. Somewhere out there, a fleet was moving because of an order I had given. A network of people trusted me to lead with precision and strength. And yet, here I was, being told to dim that light for the sake of someone else's comfort. That's when I decided I wouldn't explain myself anymore. Not to my family. Not to anyone. The next time they wanted me invisible, they'd learn exactly what it looks like when I choose to be seen. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even curse. I just sat still, letting the silence settle, like dust after an impact. Then I opened my laptop. My fingers moved without hesitation, each keystroke a decision. I logged into our secure military database, eyes scanning contract records, until one name caught my attention. Atlas Systems. That was the firm run by Lexi's father. The one my family was trying to impress. The one currently holding a logistics contract tied to our coastal deployment strategy. The project was significant. Multi-year funding, critical for mission continuity, and still under review. And I, vice commander of that task force, had final oversight. I clicked through performance logs, delivery schedules, and compliance checks. One discrepancy after another emerged like weak links in a chain. I kept scrolling until I found exactly what I was looking for. A line of data with enough weight to demand scrutiny. Enough to justify my presence at any table that thought they could ignore me. I didn't hesitate. I pressed the intercom. Lieutenant Jennings. My office. My aide entered within seconds. Sharp in posture, even sharper in awareness. He had seen this version of me before. Calm. Focused. Unshakable. We'll be attending the reception on Saturday, I said without looking up. I want you to pull everything we have on Atlas. Full compliance summary. Bring the performance files, too. He nodded. Civilian dress or service uniform? I finally looked him in the eye. Full dress. Official duties. Make it known. His eyes lit up for a brief second. Not with surprise, but immediate understanding. This wasn't personal anymore. It was policy. Protocol. Precision. And I wasn't coming as someone's cousin. I was coming as the ranking officer responsible for the contract that could make or break their future. For the first time in years, I wasn't shrinking to fit their comfort. I was walking in as I was. The military didn't hand me a rank to be hidden away at brunch tables. My authority wasn't a costume I wore to intimidate. It was earned. It came with responsibility, and I would wear it, literally and figuratively, in every room that tried to ignore it. The plan wasn't revenge. It was clarity. Let them see the full picture. Let them understand what it really means to ask a woman like me to stay silent. I arrived at the venue 10 minutes early. I wore a sleek navy blue dress, hair pulled back, no insignia, no visible rank. Just Natalie, the agreeable cousin, showing up to support the family. As I walked through the doors, I caught the wave of relief pass over Aunt Diane's face. She actually sighed. "Thank you for being so gracious," she whispered, patting my arm like I was a pet that had finally learned to behave. I nodded once and gave her the kind of smile people wear in press photos. Neutral. Controlled. Lexi was radiant in a silver gown, holding court near the ice sculpture, laughing a little too loudly at someone's joke. Jake stood beside her, flushed with pride and champagne. They looked like royalty at a coronation, completely unaware that the ground beneath them was already shifting. Lexi spotted me and waved me over like I was staff. "Natalie, you made it!" Her voice rang with that bright, brittle tone reserved for people you don't take seriously. She glanced at my dress and gave an approving nod. "So elegant. You look so normal." I just smiled. She turned back to her group and said, "Guys, did you know Natalie's in the Navy?" She designs stuff for the ships, like interiors or logistics or something. The group chuckled politely, not cruelly, just carelessly dismissive. One man leaned in and said, "So, you're like the decorator for submarines?" Lexi laughed. "Yeah, or the Martha Stewart of maritime." I stood there, glass in hand, heart steady. I didn't flinch. I didn't correct them. I just let the joke breathe in the space, watched it land with the light cruelty of people who assume they're safe. Jake avoided my eyes. He always did when Lexi went too far. She was fearless around me because she didn't know what power looked like outside a boardroom. She thought control came from charm and cheekbones. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make her shift her weight slightly. Then I turned my head. Not to her. Not to Jake. I looked straight at Lexi's father, who had been listening from 2 seats away. I met his eyes and held them for a beat, longer than necessary. No smile. No expression. Just the calm certainty of someone who already knows how this ends. He blinked first. I didn't answer Lexi right away. I let her laugh echo a second longer than it should have, let the others glance around, unsure whether they were supposed to join in. I kept my eyes on her father. He was mid-bite, his fork paused in the air, watching me with mild curiosity. That's when I spoke, clear and low, addressing him directly. I command the logistics chain that Atlas Systems reports to. The words didn't echo, but the silence that followed felt louder than anything I'd heard all night. The room didn't stop. The music didn't cut. But something shifted, like the temperature dropped a few degrees. Mr. Carter lowered his fork slowly, eyes narrowing as he registered what I'd said. Not what I implied, what I confirmed. "Command?" he asked. This time, with none of the casual tone he'd used earlier. I nodded once. "Vice Commander Brooks, and your firm is currently pending a critical compliance review for the coastal deployment contract." His expression broke first. A flicker of shock, then immediate, frantic calculation. He looked me up and down like he was seeing a new, dangerous shape in a puzzle he thought he already finished. Lexi's mouth was still half open, her smile frozen into something awkward and unsure. Her eyes darted between me and her father, realizing the joke hadn't landed. Realizing she wasn't holding the spotlight anymore, Jake had gone pale. He didn't say anything, just shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Like he'd suddenly remembered he had forgotten to mention something very important to his future father-in-law. I stayed quiet, let the weight of the moment settle on them. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to explain what my title meant. Mr. Carter knew. That's why he sat up straighter, why the laughter at our table had vanished like smoke. He wasn't looking at the quiet cousin anymore. He was looking at the person holding the pen over his contract. I gave no smile, no wink, no triumphant grin, just a steady gaze and a calm presence. Because I wasn't there to win an argument. I was there to remind them of what they'd chosen to overlook. In a single sentence, the room had flipped. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I just told the truth and watched it reshape everything. The sound of polished shoes clicking across the marble cut through the music like a razor. Heads turned as my aide, Lieutenant Simmons, strode toward our table in full, crisp service uniform, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. He held a secured briefcase in one hand, the military seal gleaming under the ballroom lights. He stopped just behind my chair, ignoring the champagne, the dancers, the awkward silence. "Commander Brooks," he said, his voice clear, professional, and just loud enough to turn every head nearby. "You have a secure briefing at 2,100 hours regarding the Atlas file. I brought the preliminary documentation, as requested." He offered the briefcase without breaking focus. "Mr. Carter stiffened like a man hit with cold water. Lexi looked like she was about to be sick. Jake just stared at the briefcase, blinking, like he couldn't quite believe it was real. I took it calmly, set it on the table, and clicked it open. Charts, performance reports, logistics gaps, numbers that spoke in a language no one at that table could understand. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I looked at Mr. Carter and said evenly, "We have some significant concerns about your company's contract compliance. This is not the setting I would have chosen, but since we're all here, let's begin." And just like that, every illusion of control in that room shattered. Not because I yelled, because I showed up with facts, authority, and zero need for their approval. The rest of the reception blurred around me. People danced, glasses clinked, music played, but our table had fallen into a hush that felt almost sacred in its tension. Mr. Carter sat straighter than before, shoulders tense, eyes locked on the open folder in front of us. He didn't ask about the wedding or the venue or the dessert. He asked about deliverables. He asked how his team could fix things. His voice was lower, careful, sincere. When he apologized, he didn't do it for show. There was no smirk or defensiveness. Just a man who realized he had grossly underestimated the person sitting across from him. And he wasn't the only one. My aunt hovered on the other side of the room. Too far to interrupt, but close enough to watch everything. Her expression had shifted from judgment to confusion, then to something resembling genuine regret. Lexi never returned to the table. Jake did, briefly, just to mutter something that might have been sorry, then disappeared into the crowd. Later that night, when I got back to my quarters, I sat in silence for a while. Not out of shock, but from something deeper. The weight of it all was finally lifting. All those years I spent twisting myself into someone they could accept. All the birthdays and achievements that were footnotes. All the Sunday dinners where I bit my tongue so they wouldn't feel small. I realized I didn't want their validation anymore. It had always been too cheap. There was a time when I would have done anything to hear them say they were proud of me. Just once. I thought it would fix something. That if I earned their praise, maybe I'd finally belong. But that night, as I looked out over the base from my window, I knew the truth. I didn't need them to see me, because the people who mattered already did. My team knew who I was. My peers trusted my judgment. My country had placed its confidence in my command. And I had learned to trust myself in ways no family gathering could ever teach me. Their silence at the wedding wasn't just awkward. It was clarity. Proof that I no longer lived in their world. I didn't shrink for them anymore. I didn't bend. The funny thing is, they eventually did say it. A few weeks later, I got a text from Jake. "We get it now. We're proud of you." I stared at those words for a long time, and then I archived the message without replying. Not out of anger, but because I didn't need it anymore. That night at the wedding, I didn't just win some personal battle. I reclaimed my identity on my own terms. And that's a kind of respect. No toast, no title, and no family approval can ever touch. A year later, I stood on the tarmac at Andrews, the sun sharp against the polished white of my full-dress uniform. Jets roared faintly in the distance. The air smelled like jet fuel and salt. Before me stood rows of sailors and Marines, all information, all watching. This was the change of command ceremony. I was taking over a joint task force that most officers only dreamed of leading, and I didn't feel nervous. I felt at home. The applause came not in bursts, but in one unified wave, crisp, loud, earned. It wasn't the scattered clapping I remembered from family dinners, the kind that came with sideways looks and forced smiles. This was different. This was the sound of people who knew what it took to be up there. My eyes scanned the crowd and landed on General Rourke, who gave me a nod. Not a speech, not a smile, just a nod of equal acknowledgement. And it meant everything. Later that afternoon, I stood in my new office, high above the harbor, watching the carriers rest below. The walls were bare. The desk was clean. It would fill up soon with reports, decisions, and more responsibility. But for now, it was just quiet. A kind of peace I had never found in a family living room. My aide walked in and handed me an envelope. Thick, cream-colored. I knew the logo was printed at the top. It was a thank you letter from Mr. Carter, polite, professional. He wrote that Project Atlas had not only recovered but was now outperforming every metric. He thanked me for my direct oversight and credited our team for setting a new standard. But inside, tucked behind the formal letter, was a handwritten card. Short, simple. It read, P.S. Chloe is no longer with Jake. She's working as an unpaid intern at a nonprofit. She's learning a great deal. Note: changed Lexi to Chloe here to follow the original structure, though the character was Lexi previously. kept the rest as is. I read that line twice, not because it surprised me, but because of the weight behind it. That wasn't just a status update. That was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get from that world. And somehow, it was enough. Not because I needed it, but because it came from someone who had once looked through me and now saw myself clearly. I set the note aside, walked to the window, and let my eyes settle on the ships below. My team will arrive soon, the real one, the people who had stood by me, not because of a shared last name, but because we shared something stronger: purpose, integrity, mutual respect. That was the family I belonged to, the one that clapped in unison, the one that followed me into storms, and never once asked me to shrink. If you've ever felt like the background character in your own family, like no matter what you achieve, it's never quite enough, I see you. I spent years thinking that if I just worked harder, stayed quieter, or made myself smaller, they'd finally notice. But the truth is, some people will never see you clearly, no matter how bright you shine. So this is for anyone who's been overlooked, underestimated, or laughed off. Your strength, your work, your voice, it matters. And not because someone else finally says it does, but because you already know it's true. The day I stopped waiting for their applause was the day I stepped into my real power. You don't need a title, a uniform, or permission to take up space. You're allowed to define yourself. You're allowed to walk into the room like you belong, because you do. And if you've had to use your professional strength just to hold personal boundaries, I hope you'll share your story too, because someone else out there needs to hear it. Your worth isn't something others get to decide. And the moment you realize that is the moment everything changes.